Hi everyone, this is Mari Craig, and you're listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show, a podcast where we discuss how we can achieve more wellness in our lives one small step at a time. For the past 6 odd years, I've taken a special interest in nutrition and I've changed the diet of my family on its head. But as I've dived deeper into the world of nutrition, I have learned that health is so much more than just what we put on our plate. This is why on this podcast we will be talking nutrition, mental health, being in alignment, holistic health care, self care, raising children, and more. We will also be hearing stories of women's journeys to overcome trauma and what it has taught them on the way. When we share our stories, we realize we are not alone and that things can change for the better. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey as I explore what health and wellness truly encompass. If you like what you're hearing, please consider rating the show with a 5-star rating and sharing it with your friends. It really makes a big difference. Now, on with today's show.
Hello and welcome to the Small Steps to Wellness show with me, your host, Mari Craig, where we discuss how we can achieve more wellness in our lives, one small step at a time. This episode today is slightly different. A few days ago, it would have been my dad's 70th birthday, but sadly, he passed away just before he turned 52. And with some wisdom that time inevitably brings with it, I know that whilst his body was probably exhausted, to be honest, from alcohol, antidepressants, what have you, I think it was his mental health that in the end killed him. Telling his story is probably a whole episode in itself, and I'm not sure it would be a very coherent story or even a very interesting story. But what this anniversary has made me want to do is put together an episode for you with different people who all have wisdom and experience to share when it comes to mental health issues. And it is my hope that you will take some comfort from their stories, some wisdom, perhaps even some clarity and knowledge that you can use to help yourself or perhaps guide a loved one. I have to say, though, that if anything in this episode triggers you, please reach out to someone you trust and can speak to, or consider contacting your GP for further help. Now, first out is my friend Amy. She's a reflexologist, former teacher, mom, and all-around beautiful person. And here she talks about her mental health following childbirth.
Hi, Mari. So yeah, my experience of dealing with mental health issues really revolves, I guess, around when I had my children, because I think that's when I noticed it the most. But thinking back before I had kids, probably from my early 20s, I remember having episodes of low mood and kind of wondering if there was something wrong with me, because it was just all in my head and, nothing was really that visible. I'd always been physically active. When I was a kid, I was really sporty. I had a job in my late teens at a gym. So I've always loved working out and like the feeling that my body gets from exercising. However, I started to notice I was getting quite bad digestive issues in my 20s. I'd get quite constipated or I'd get diarrhea. And also, really embarrassingly, I'd get really smelly wind. And I literally had no idea why. And I was really naive at that age, or perhaps ignorant to perhaps, there was this possibility that my lifestyle wasn't serving me or what I was eating was potentially contributing to that. But I kind of didn't make that connection, I was just busy enjoying life. I was eating drive-through KFC, McDonald's. I'd be ordering pizza, just getting fish and chips, I guess being that kind of student, I suppose, that didn't want to cook from scratch. I was drinking fizzy drinks. I think Red Bull was my best friend, sometimes with a bit of vodka in. Thinking back now. And I think when I used to drive back and forth from my university to home, it was a long drive. I think Haribo's would kind of keep me going. And I guess at the time I just didn't link the two, that what I was eating was really affecting my mental well-being. It sounds ridiculous now that I've learned about it. So anyway, I just carried on just thinking this was how my life was meant to be. And I guess I was like, well, I'm just gonna have to accept the hand I've been given. I've just got a bit of a sensitive tummy. So fast forward about 10 years, when I got pregnant with my first child, I was 30. I consciously started to make an effort with my diet because I was growing a little person. I obviously wanted her to be healthy. So I did cut back on all the junk, and I did try to eat more healthily. So I did make an effort, but when she was born, I really wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. Initially, we struggled with the breastfeeding. And I don't know if it's because I'm a Taurus or I'm just particularly stubborn. I really didn't want to give her any formula. So I just decided I'd persist and persist until we got it right, which we did. However, I would feed her at any opportunity. And within weeks, I was such a sleep deprived mess. I didn't know what day it was. I'd get confused with when I'd fed her last. I literally felt I was losing my mind. I tried to go outside for a walk, but I'd forget my keys and end up in a state because I'd have to call my partner to come back from work or anyone who had a spare set. And all I really wanted to do was go to sleep. My mind really needed a break, and my body was just falling apart. I wasn't sleeping for any longer than like an hour and a half at a time. And as the months went on, I mean, this went on for like 5 months, it really started to take its toll. I wasn't eating well. Once my partner had gone back to work after a couple of weeks, I was living off like cheese and Marmite sandwiches. I was hardly eating any fruit or vegetables. There was no way I could find the energy to cook anything properly. And at the same time, I was feeling quite resentful towards my baby. I mean, I loved her so much, and I was doing everything I could to make sure that she was okay. But inside, I was seriously struggling. There were moments when I wanted just to give up. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I'm very thankful that I managed to get through those kind of darker times and moments. And I guess you might be thinking, like, why wasn't I asking for any help? But at the time, my mind was so kind of warped and just all over the place that, I think I thought if I did ask for help, it would sort of, I don't know, expose me for being like a terrible mom. And, I didn't want people to think that of me. I wanted to be this great mom and doing the best I can. So on the surface, I was coming across like, yeah, everything's fine. Yeah, I'm tired, but maybe I was thinking maybe that's how all mums are supposed to feel. I can't, say that I'm not feeling great because, I've just got to suck it up, I suppose. It sounds crazy now, but I think there was also this deep rooted fear that maybe they might take my baby away from me if I said I couldn't deal with it. I'm thankfully, someone I think recommended a child sleep consultant, and she was amazing. I think she was like an angel she showed me how to help my baby sleep independently, basically, and not needing to feed throughout the night, which was what I was kind of, I guess, defaulting to. So as soon as we mastered this, it was quite quick. My energy started to come back, but I was getting a full night's sleep, but I can't tell you how much of a difference it made. I was able to start prepping healthy meals. I could start to even think about the next meal ahead, and perhaps what I could I make something better than a cheese and Marmite sandwich. So things were kind of a lot better. I was getting a good night's sleep, and my baby was at the age of weaning, so she must have been about 6 months old. I was feeling better. I was cooking her some amazing food and trying to eat, the same food as her, but it was always just about her, and I probably just put my own needs at the back. So yeah, I was feeling better. I was on my way back to better health and did feel emotionally and mentally a lot better, but I still got those low mood episodes, and I would just put it down to being tired because, like I said before, isn't that how all mums felt? And then baby number two came along, and that was even harder. I had 2 kids to juggle this time. I was determined to master the sleep early with the second baby because I knew what I needed to do this time. And I did. And I'm really pleased I did, because God knows what a mess I'd be if I wasn't sleeping for another 5 months with her. So we mastered the sleep with her. I did still feel exhausted and resentful towards my kids just because I wasn't ever getting a day off. I still wasn't asking for help. I wasn't saying, can someone just take the baby while I just go for a walk? That's what I wanted to do, but I didn't. So I still felt like crap, in all honesty. I would be cooking those healthy foods for the kids, but I wouldn't necessarily eat the same thing and then, you know, be busy tidying up and then just snacking on junk, really. I mean, I wouldn't be going to the drive-throughs or anything, but just sort of, you know, the crisps and the kind of quick kind of sugary filled processed foods, you know. And then I guess my mind was sort of overwhelmed with the logistics of having two young kids and also the prospect of going back to work. That frightened the life out of me, thinking, how am I going to cope with that as well? And it was, I guess, just having that sort of responsibility of two kids and also being the breadwinner. I needed to go back to work. So I remember it was in the summer holidays before I went back to work. I was a teacher, so I was going to go back in the September. My cousin turned up one day to see me and the kids, and she was one of the healthiest people I knew. And she offered me some advice about how I could get healthier. I think she could see that I wasn't that well. You know, I'd put on quite a bit of post-baby weight, as they call it. And I think she could just see through it. And what she suggested involved trying to increase my fruit and vegetable intake, simple as that. And also taking a whole food supplement that was full of the nutrients from fruits and vegetables and berries as well, to kind of, I guess, you know, bridge that gap, because she knew that I wasn't going to be eating that many. But she just said, try to eat more fruit and vegetables. So I took her advice and I gave it a go. And do you know what? Within 6 weeks, my energy levels had rocketed. I was not expecting it. I was really surprised. I was thinking, hang on, I don't need to have a nap while the baby's napping. Great, you know, I can play with my older child, and you know, instead of having her watching TV while I have a quick nap, you know, it was fantastic. I never once believed I could feel that much energy as I had before. And then I was thinking, well, you know, I've got to go back to work. You know, I'm stressed about that, but I'm happy that I've got the energy. I feel more positive that I can, you know, do it. And that's what really sort of, I guess, changed me, was just getting that energy back, despite, you know, having two kids and being really busy. So I guess it just led me to think more about the fact that how I was eating more fruits and vegetables, as simple as that sounds, and how much of a difference it was making. So I started to sort of delve a bit more and start learning about the benefits of a predominantly plant-based diet. You know, I actively tried to change up my diet. I started thinking, okay, well, how can we incorporate that? And, you know, it just gave me a bit more of a focus to, you know, the sorts of things that I could do to help me. And my mental clarity was starting to come back, and it really helped. And at the same time, my cousin again said, you know, you could do, like, I guess when you go back to work, like a 30-day type cleanse, like a detox that could really benefit you. So I took on her advice and listened to her ideas, which was pretty much focusing on getting your sleep, which I was, increasing my hydration, which I definitely wasn't doing, but then started to do. I really tried to prioritize drinking water over the kind of fizzier drinks or the fruit drinks, the juices. I was moving a lot, which was, you know, parent of two kids, but I was actively trying to do more exercise, like in inverted commas, like, you know, active exercise, and also breath work. I started to meditate. I learned ways that I could control my mind and do some, you know, just breathwork activities. It only took like a minute or so, but it did make a big difference. And then, of course, the diet, and making sure that I was removing as much junk and as much processed food as possible, and just putting that bit of extra effort into cooking foods from scratch. And although saying that in a long list sounds like a lot to do, I just did it step by step. You know, I didn't try and do it all in one go. It was really small steps, and everything changed. You know, my mental clarity, like I mentioned, was amazing. I had so much more focus. I was looking at my life from such a different perspective of how something as simple as what I was eating could improve and affect my physical health, but also my mental health. And it felt quite empowering. I was so much happier in myself. I was getting much less feelings of those sort of low moods, those sort of times that were just becoming less and less frequent. So by the time baby number 3 came along, 3 years later, it was a completely different game. It was you'd think after, you know, having 3, it would be even harder because you've got 3 kids to deal with. It was actually a lot easier because I had the energy, because my body was full of really good nutrients. You know, I guess by having all of that inside my body had really prepared me and given my body that foundation to grow a baby in, you know, the optimum environment that I could. So when he was born, I remember going to the GP after 6 weeks, and she said to me, you know, when babies are born and you're breastfeeding, especially, your brain shrinks. And I was like, what? So it seems, and there's evidence out there to show that physically a woman's brain temporarily, thank goodness, temporarily shrinks while the baby just basically takes what it needs. And I thought, well, wow, that's kind of what was happening to me, but I wasn't providing and I guess filling back the gaps that, you know, the baby was taking with my previous 2. And I had no issues postnatally with any kind of, obviously the tiredness was just was okay, the sleep was fine, but I had no feelings of like, oh my gosh, this is really overwhelming, or oh my gosh, I just, you know, want to have a day off. Of course we all feel that anyway, but it is always nice to do that. But it was, everything just seems much more manageable. And I truly believe that what we eat, I mean, there's so much research out there now to show the connection between our gut microbiome and the state of our mental well-being. There's a lot of links between depression and anxiety, and the balance of gut flora and things like that. So it was just a real game changer to see the difference with my 3rd baby, having sorted out my own physical health and my lifestyle. I was just emotionally equipped to deal with the kind of trials and tribulations of having children. And, you know, I'm not saying that I was like super mum and everything was really easy. There would be really challenging times, but because I was well equipped with my physical health, I think having that nailed, it just gave me a better perspective to be able to address any kind of feelings of, oh gosh, this is hard. But it was okay. I'd managed to find strategies and ways to look at it from their different perspective, rather than being the kind of victim of, oh no, why is this happening to me? It's, oh, you know, what can I do? You know, I can go for a walk, you know, I can get moving, I can drink some more water, I can, you know, take rest where I need it. And also remembering that, you know, thinking back to when my first child was born, you know, that felt like that time was never going to end, but it goes by so quickly. And, you know, all of these things do pass and we learn so much from them. And I think if we can really address our own physical health and in turn our mental health, it just makes it, the whole experience, so much better. And I am determined to educate my children when they have their own children to always ask for help, and always say if they need anything, and not be that sort of stoic, like, no, I'm okay, because that did me no favors whatsoever. So yeah, I'm determined to make sure that they are well aware, and they already know that different foods that they eat are beneficial to their health and other foods that they will not be. So yeah, it's already started.
I also had the honor of talking to a friend about the challenges she faced when she realized that her daughter was going through some really hard times and struggled with her mental health a while back. I'm so grateful that she was willing to share their story with us and some of the strategies they employed to help their daughter.
Hi. I just want to share some experiences. I'm not an expert by any means, but it's a learning process, and I consider myself still to be learning. But back in, I think it was 2020, everything seems a bit muddled because of those COVID years that we had. So it was back in 2020, yeah. And my daughter was at university at the time, and she was back at home for a short time, and it was during that time we came to understand that she'd been experiencing mental health issues of anxiety. She had a lot of anxiety, and the funny thing was, as a parent, you think you know your child, and it came as a real blow and a shock that as much as you think you know your child, there are still things that they can keep from you and keep well hidden. And this is what happened to us. And so I guilted myself for ages, and probably still do, that I hadn't picked up on any of the signs. But what you come to realize is that the signs can be ever so minuscule, and they can sort of fit in with anything. So, you know, if you're a university student, you're obviously going to be stressed at some points. And so, you know, it's quite understandable if they are stressed. But that said, what happened that I suppose was the catalyst was that she really did kind of, I think I realized now in hindsight, was going through I suppose, what do they call it? A crisis moment. And it became apparent that she was very, very distressed. And then I had to go into action. And it was quite a dramatic thing that happened at the time. I don't wish to go into it too much, but I will say that it did have me really, really worried about her overall state of being, whether or not she would help, if she would do something silly. Anyway, as a result of that, I then realized it was quite serious, and I called some people that I knew who had worked in mental health, and they were really helpful and gave me various numbers and agencies to call. And once I did that, things started to improve. I got another family member who is a trusted family member, very close to the family involved, and they were able to help and support me, if you like, because as the parent, I felt that at that point and at that time I was out of my depth. I didn't have all the answers. So it was good to have another family member who was also involved. Not everybody in the family is aware, just very close family members, brother and sister. From there, what we did do was that we got some professional help in terms of talking therapies. Got that in place, and I also got another friend who I knew had personal experiences of mental health issues, and she was a real great source of help, and my daughter was able to confide in her in addition to the professional person. And also in terms of my own development and growth, I found that talking and allowing them to talk and just say whatever it was they wanted to say, whether you liked what you heard or didn't like what you heard, you know, I had to really learn how, and I always thought I was a good listener, but I really had to learn, because when it's your child, you kind of want to have all the answers, and you want to be able to sort out their problems and their issues, and you know, you want to be able to magic it away, really. But I discovered that as a parent, you don't really have that that power always. And the most important thing for her at that time was for me to be there and to be able to just listen, and that's all I had to do. And I found actually that I discovered that it was a really powerful place to be with her, because what that meant was that she felt freed to come and talk to me at any time and about anything. And even though it was as a mum, it was hard to hear some of the things that she said, but I realized that in order to sort of help her be there, and I did have this help from other sources, like the friend who'd also gone through these things, that you just have to be there and just have to listen, and listen without judgment, and listen without having all the answers. And I'm still learning to do that, but I am much better at doing it than I ever thought I could be, because there were times when I used to think, I just have to be able to say something, but that's not the key. It's about talking about it. It's about going through the process. So that's the most kind of important thing that I've learned, is how to listen, and listen without judgment, without criticism, without wanting to solve it all. And consequently, as time progressed, I've seen her, I think she's blossomed. That's not to say that she's not, that it's magicked itself away. She still has issues, but what we also found was, what helps is that exercise, and regular exercise, really helped. Doing things that she enjoyed, like I remember we did a pottery class together, and she's now gone on to involve herself more in those kinds of things. So doing activities, having activities that help her to express herself in other ways, have been really helpful, along with obviously a good diet. She does take some supplements, and these are really well researched supplements in terms of how they help the immune system. So that helps. Diet helps. She's working on sleep. Sleep at the moment is not something that she does particularly well, and I wonder if it's something that I've passed on to her, because I like sleep, but I don't do it as well as I should do. So that's something that she's working on, and we're both kind of like working on it together. And I found that she's not needing to rely on me as much as she did in the early days. We were always talking, but I do check in on her and make sure that I'm here for her if she needs to talk. I kind of have to learn as well to understand that, even though sometimes she might say she's fine, there's certain phrases that I can use to help sort of prompt her to open up if she feels the need to, because maybe I know that she's a high functioning young lady, and she's quite independent, and doesn't like feeling vulnerable or unempowered. So I know there are certain phrases that I need to sort of use with her to remind her that I am here for her, and that she can talk, and that it's not weak, that if she's having a bad day, she can say she's having a bad day. She does have other siblings which she can offload to, but I'm always there as well. And I know that there's sometimes there are things that she feels maybe that she can say to her siblings that she can't say to me, and vice versa. So it's good that she's got a network of people that she knows that she can talk to when things are not always going according to plan. I can't think what else to say, really. It's been a learning curve. It's still a learning curve for both of us. And it's a work in progress. We understand that this is a chronic condition. It's not something that's going to go away. But she has to learn to develop strategies that are going to work for her. Well, one of the other things that she did do, particularly when she was really going through a downer, is recognizing that she's made a lot of progress, and she used to do a reward sheet, and I also encourage her to do a reward sheet to make a note of the areas that she was finding difficult, and make a note of when she made any, however small the progress was. I think one of the things is she'd had intrusive thoughts. So managing to quieten that intrusive thought, if she's managed to do that either by talking to herself or yoga, that's another thing that she's taken up. If she's managed to do anything whatsoever, just log it down, and then she could see over the week how many successes she actually did have over the things that she didn't think she had, and it was easier for her to see that, yeah, I am making progress, I am doing well, I am having better days than not. So it's good to have some sort of visual timetable or visual list of things that you've done well, as opposed to not done well, because we can't always keep it all in our heads, what we've done, how we've done. It's good to have something visual. So that's something that she's employed and found really useful. And rewarding herself with something nice. I don't know, it could be a cake, or it could be a nails, go and get your nails done, or whatever. It could be whatever, or and walks in the park. That's another thing that she's been doing a bit, walking, and lots of walks in nature. She's finding that really helpful. So at the early days, it was really hairy, scary at first, but learning to live with it is something that can be done. You need to get the help where it's available. There is help available, help on the NHS, and there's obviously private help as well. But I've found personally, for me, it's good to talk. And when talking, you discover that actually it's not so unusual, or it's not so strange. Lots and lots and lots of people are going through all sorts of things. And mental health is one of those things which more and more people are experiencing and are talking about. So it is good to talk. That's been my experience, not keep it in. Letting it out is really important. And I think my daughter's found that too. So, yeah, I think that's all I can think of to say. I hope this helps anyone out there who's got children experiencing mental health issues. Let them know that you're there for them, and that you're just an open ear that's just not going to judge. You're just going to listen, and you're not going to claim to have all the answers. They just want someone to, be able to just say what it is that's on their mind without worrying about how it's going to land on that person, even if that person is their parent. And I mean, for those of us who maybe find it too hard as a parent, if you can enlist the help of somebody close to the family who is a trusted member, maybe that person could also be helpful in terms of talking out if it's too difficult for child and parent to talk. But I hope that it isn't, and that you do find a way, because it's really important to be there for them, just even as you might think it's not being helpful, but it really is for that person going through the difficulties, to have somebody there to listen to without any fear of judgment, basically. Yes, I hope that's been helpful.
As a nutritional therapist, Debbie Best is experienced in helping her clients with a variety of issues, including mental health. But what happens when trauma hits you and you theoretically know what you should be doing? Debbie's experience is up next.
So the two things that I see massively in clinic, really, Mari, are stress and dysregulated blood sugar control. So we've learned over the last few decades that food definitely has an effect on our mood. So where diet can be key in prevention and support of mental health disorders, anything really from acute stress, depression, anxiety, postnatal depression, and sort of attention deficit disorders, so that, and more, to be honest. But what we've learned is that there's a huge connection between what we eat and our gut microbiome. So for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's the term that's given to trillions of bacteria that live in our gut. They outnumber our human cells, funny enough, by 10 to 1. So we're actually more bacteria than human. How's that? But they're there by design. They're not there by default. And it's these little critters that have many functions, such as making vitamins such as the B12 and B vitamins. They're essential for mental health and energy production. Substances that keep our lining of the gut from leaking, such as butyrate, which is a short-chain fatty acid. And if things leak into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there, that causes inflammation and triggers the immune system. And that affects the brain too. So, that definitely affects our health. Plus, 90% of serotonin is made in the gut, and it's one of the neurotransmitters that makes us feel good and happy. So a dysregulated gut means we're not making as many feel-good hormones. So as you can see, gut function has a massive effect on the brain and mental health. So that's one of the areas that I concentrate on when getting, clients' gut healthy. So a diet that's made from whole foods that are rich in nutrients will have a positive effect on our gut and our mood. And conversely, over-consuming high sugar, salt and fats and these ultra processed foods that are just in every single aisle in the supermarket, and drinks that are full of sugar and sweeteners, they make us feel terrible, and they can alter this gut microbiome and create what we call a dysbiotic gut. And this directly affects the delivery of nutrients to our brain and all of the gut function that I've just mentioned. So with my clients, removing all of this junk, such as this ultra processed food and sugar, is absolutely paramount, because these can cause sugar imbalances as well, which will have our blood sugars peaking and troughing throughout the day. And that really does significantly affect our mood. So this dysregulated blood sugar can make us feel anxious, depressed, and long-term can contribute to diabetes. But it also affects something in our body called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and it acts by causing internal stress within our body and create the stress response, where we release adrenaline and cortisol, which is also like the same response as being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So if that's going on day in, day out, as it is, most of our diet, or a lot of our diets, are really high in sugar and just all of this processed junk, that it's like a constant stress on the body. So our body doesn't switch into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is where we do a lot of our rest and repair. So you can see by sort of following diets like this, how we're setting ourselves up for mental health and also physical health issues. And it's just can sometimes just spiral out of control. And also, the gut is home to 70% of your immune system, where this diversity of bacteria help the body identify and eliminate pathogens. And our immune system, if it's not functioning correctly, can also impact our mood, because the gut talks to our brain through this fantastic highway called the vagus nerve, which runs sort of from the gut up to the brain. So that really does affect our mental health as well. It's really a very complex interplay between the gut and the brain. A recent study actually showed, it was in the journal Nutrients, that showed the prevalence of anxiety and depression was significantly higher in participants that consume greater than 5 servings of these ultra processed foods a day, compared with those that consume just less than 3. So you can see that these ultra processed foods that lack these sufficient nutrients to nourish the gut, leaving them unable to perform their duties, as we've mentioned. And secondly, the integrity of the gut and its lining can deteriorate, giving rise to leakage, which is often referred to as leaky gut. So these leaked nutrients are free to travel around the body and cause havoc. So that we're not being fully digested, and therefore it can affect our brain. So these rogue nutrients can make their way across the blood-brain barrier and can influence normal brain activities, giving rise to the mental health symptoms and or exacerbating any symptoms that they've already got. So you can see it's quite complex, but which foods support mood then? So we not only feed ourselves when we eat, but we feed these trillions of microbes as well. And food is a key modulator of our gut microbes. So good quality protein, healthy fats, whole grains, nuts and seeds, lots of vegetables rich in phytonutrients from plants are needed to keep our bodies fully functioning, but they also keep our microbes well fed as well. So it's a typical westernized diet, high in fat, sugar, refined grains, fried and processed foods, red meat, high fat dairy and low fruit and vegetable intake. And that's really important because our vegetable intake in the UK is really quite atrocious. And this is associated with a higher incidence of depression. So by removing or definitely restricting these types of foods, you will have a significant effect on your mental health. I think actually at this stage, Mari, it might be a good idea for me to just tell you what happened to me personally, because I think then this might help people sort of put it into perspective. So during 2020, during lockdown, you know, we have all been there, we've all been through the process, and I think a lot of people during that time, their mental health suffered. But I really stepped up my healthy eating during that time. I felt I was eating really clean. I was using fasting and intermittent fasting as part of some of the programs that we run. And for a whole year leading up to October 21, do you know what? I actually felt like I was in the best shape ever. I felt fabulous. My body fat was the lowest it had ever been. And I just felt radiant. But during this time, I was the main carer for my mum. She'd had Alzheimer's for she had it for a while, but she'd been diagnosed a couple of years by then. And I'd been managing her for about 2 years. And I thought I was doing really well. But the last year of her life just turned me upside down, really. She was really very aggressive towards me. And I guess I was finding it increasingly difficult to cope mentally. So in October 21, up until that point, I think I had been coping what I thought was coping really well. But I think then the wheels really came off. Mum stopped eating and she wouldn't get out of bed. So I had to involve the GP heavily. And the upshot of that, eventually, after a huge amount of stress, we actually got her into a wonderful home. But unfortunately, they couldn't get her to eat either. And she died in January 22. But of course, the stress didn't just stop there. You know, I was executor of a will, had to sort out all of her estate. And of course, I was grief-stricken throughout this time. And then sort of roll forward to April. So just a couple of months later, I lost my Labrador quite unexpectedly. And do you know what? That was the nail in the coffin. He was so pivotal in how I managed my mum and how I managed my stress. You know, we didn't go out for the long walks because he'd listened to me. He'd listened to me venting my steam, you know, and dogs don't pass judgment. And they, you know, that loss was just awful. So, you know, as you can imagine, from December 21, when mum was in the home, I would spend hours with her. And therefore, do you know what? I have to admit, my eating habits got out of control. I didn't have the time to sort of cook. You know, my husband helped a lot, but I was still eating for comfort. I would turn to foods that I hadn't eaten for a long time, like sandwiches and bread and biscuits. And, you know, poached eggs on toast is pretty healthy, but, you know, the bread would become my normal. And I don't do bread. It makes me feel so uncomfortable and bloated, and my joints started to ache, and it definitely affected my mood. And of course, add to that the increase in alcohol content, because I'd come home from the home and I'd just be exhausted and mentally drained, and I just felt like I needed something to take the edge off. You know, so you can see just so quite quickly my eating habits just got out of control. And you say the lack of the long dog walks, because I just didn't have the time, just sort of spiraled out of control. I felt guilty, a huge amount of guilt, because as a nutritional therapist, I felt like a failure. I felt that all the eating and drinking habits that were both feeding and feeling and making me feel just mentally messy. And it's just so important to realise that, you know, I'm human as well. And I really felt like a failure. But that sounds terrible, doesn't it? Doom and gloom everywhere. And I think, you know, the good news is, what I would say to people is, it's all about a decision. I decided that after Christmas, enough was enough. You know, get a grip, girl, grow a pair, and just get back to what you know works, because we know what works. So the 1st of January this year, I started to get back on really healthy eating again, you know, cutting out all the processed stuff. The alcohol's gone, haven't drunk since Christmas. Gluten and dairy, and eating lots of that. They went and eating lots of clean meat, fruits and vegetables, plus big one, I committed to 10,000 steps a day. I was doing, I think December, I did 2,000 steps a day. So it got me outside and moving again. But, you know, it wasn't just me doing this. As you know, we do these groups. We've got a Facebook group called Revive Your Glow. It's a program that we run every couple of months. And therefore, it's so important because we've got each other to hold accountable. When I feel like I've got other people that are counting on me for support, and they support us as well. So you want to surround yourself with people that want to do the same. You know, you want people that really want to do the same for their health, and it really does help. So here we are, the beginning of February, and already I feel so much better. I look at myself in the mirror in the morning, and I just say to myself, you know, you are a work in progress, and I've done so well so far. I feel like that I've made the right decision. I've started the journey, and I know I'm just back on the right path. And what I would say is for people, just treat yourself with some compassion, get help, get people that you want to surround yourself with that can really help you move your health forward.
Thank you for sharing that, Debbie. What do you think this has done for you as a nutritional therapist in clinic, having your own experiences?
Oh my goodness, it's been absolutely massive, because I think, if I'm honest, and this is honesty now, if I sometimes I would get my clients to, you know, obviously I lay out programs for them and spend a lot of time trying to make it easy for them. But sometimes, you know, people wouldn't do what I said or do what I suggested. And sometimes I think, look, can you not just do it? Can you just not, you know, just man up and get on with it? That was what was going on in my head. But do you know what? Having gone through all of that myself, I now feel I get it. I get why sometimes people get stuck. I get why people just sometimes can't make the right choices. So with those types of people, I go much more slowly, much more gentle, and encourage them to take just one step at a time. Get that step under your belt. Get that step, that foundation belt. Do it one step at a time. I am an all or nothing person, definitely, and I know not everybody is the same as me. So if you can just make a few changes here and there, it just makes so much difference. So in answer to your question, Mari, I just feel it's made me such a much better practitioner, and although I wouldn't want to repeat that experience to get that outcome, it has really, really helped.
Thank you, Debbie. Finally, you may have heard of the expression epigenetics. My friend, Jeffrey Montague-Smith, talks about how mental health issues can have an effect across generations, but also how he believes that we can break the chain of transgenerational trauma in order to thrive. Right, so one thing that I'm really interested in finding out more about, and I have to say before I go any further, that I do have a baby on my lap, and he might cry and he might not cry, but we are authentic on this show. But it's the whole transgenerational aspect of mental health. And I've got with me my friend and colleague, Jeff Montague-Smith again, because we've talked about it before, Jeff, but I was just wondering if you could share sort of your thoughts on why it seems that mental health issues travel through generations. What is that all about?
Well, I mean, it's a massive topic, really, this, and a lot of it is I would call it emergent science in medicine. You know, we're figuring out that things come through not just on the DNA, but there's an epigenetic component as well, if we can call it that, and we can describe this transgenerational taint, or the ghosting effect, if you like, where, you know, we find that we inherit aspects from our ancestral line, and it's not just in the genes. So the way we look at it, I mean, we have a very interesting model of medicine, the way we do things. We call it integrated osteopathic medicine. And of course, there's the physical reality of what we face at the physical level. And then we have the idea of the biorhythms and the essential kind of rhythmic activities in the body. But then beyond that, we have the idea and the understanding of a meridian system, chakra system, and a wider energy field, biomagnetic field, which is commonly called the aura. Now, that really links into elements of consciousness, you know, that link to our, you could call it the soul and the spirit of us, the subtle, the higher self aspect. And there's an understanding now from the metaphysical and spiritual sciences that when the sperm meets the egg, we have obviously the life, new life is in that moment of that conception, in the spark of conception. There's an energetic exchange as well. And what the father was carrying and what the mother was carrying is now in some way imprinted into the field of consciousness around that living form, because now a baby is going to come from that. And that baby, when it leaves its mother's energy field, will be in its own field. And this is really, I guess, when we look at the ancestral component, we can say that there's inheritance at that level as well. So not just the DNA matrix, but what's happening much more subtly in the energy field. And I think as we look at mental health and we look at all the different elements of mental health, if we, you know, the basic sort of aspect of, for example, an anxiety condition, you know, then we've got the depressive tendencies, and then we've got the, you know, the sort of more acute end of mental health, where there could be sort of bipolar and schizophrenic tendencies, as well as all the other things that we see. There are many elements to that, and it includes what can happen at the physical level. So, for example, you know, an anxiety condition could come because of a challenge to the HPA axis. So we have the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is our fight and flight response. It's the governor for our survival reflexes. Now, you know, you could suffer a trauma where, I mean, I had a woman actually just yesterday who many years ago was on the motorway. She went to overtake a car, and when she tried to get in front of the car to go back into the lane so she could carry on, he accelerated in an aggressive way and wouldn't let her back in. And she thought she was going to get pushed up against the central reservation. And she had a real moment of existential threat. This was years ago. And ever since then, she's carried an anxiety about driving on motorways and dual carriageways, to the point where she will take the A roads to get to where she's going rather than go on a motorway. So she's never been able to shake off that moment where she thought the guy was a nutter and, you know, she could end up in a bad situation as a result. Now, there's a physical element to that where she's holding physical tension in the body. There's obviously you could describe it as the mental or the intellectual element of that experience, which has locked in and is literally now a program that's running, and it's not running in the background, it's running the background, because now she's making decisions to not enter into life fully because of one guy on a motorway 11 years ago. There's also an emotional component to that, because she is now a critically anxious woman, grandmother. It's actually impacting life at a very significant level, because now she's generally got a background state of anxiety, which is kind of inappropriate for the way her life should be, because she's actually got a very good life and no reason to feel anxious. So the point here is that a physical trauma or an emotional trauma or an intellectual or mental trauma or a spiritual trauma, because I believe we've got these 4 different levels of being. If something enters in at any of those levels, it can get locked in. And this is why I believe that we actually need to approach the situation root, trunk, and branch, and that we need to look at what's going on physically, we need to look at what's going on emotionally, intellectually, and also spiritually. So when we take a patient who, let's say there's a family history of depression, let's say there were potentially suicides running strongly in the family, depression, alcoholism, you know, whatever those sort of coping mechanisms are, those tragedies that are in the family line sometimes. Quite often, we work with patients and we find disturbances deeply embedded in the chakra system and what we would call the bioenergetic matrix, the aura. And we can say that there is a transgenerational tendency for that pattern of disturbance to show up in that individual, and it would be carried into their children were it not possible to clarify it. So the first thing to do is to recognize that it's there. The second thing to do is to identify where it is in the subtle anatomy from the standpoint of consciousness and the light body, if we can call it that. And then the third element is we've got to know how to clear it, how to literally reprogram the light body, how to effectively exorcise the ghost that dwells at that more subtle level. And my true belief is that what we've figured out now with the holosonic sound therapy methods that we use, the methods that allow us to measure the meridian pathways using the bioresonance technology and the electroacupuncture techniques, according to Dr. Voll. The body work that we do, because sometimes these shocks and these traumas are deeply embedded in the physical matrix. So the typical osteopathic adjustment, where we release tension patterns and fascial patterns, and we get the craniosacral system moving. This is why it's essential, I believe, to work in the multiple layers simultaneously. We need to do it all together. That's what's come out of my 34 years in practice, is that integration is essential in our therapies, and humans are having an interdimensional living experience, and we really need to see them as a human being. So they're a human at the physical level, but they are a being at the level of, you could say, the metaphysical aspects, soul and spirit. We really have to be able to work in all of those different levels. So the transgenerational component is really interesting, because we understand that there's 7 generations of inheritance. So grandmother could have her experience. She could have some kind of existential threat, shock, trauma, whatever, and it gets locked in. And she will then go on to become a mother. And then her daughter or son would go on to become a parent as well. So now the grandchildren, you could say it starts with grandma, then it goes to, the mum or the dad of that individual. And then here we are seeing the grandchild. And you could say we're 3 generations in at this point. And the tendency over that 7 generations will tend to peak at 3.5. Now, you can't have 3.5 generations. So it's in the rising ascent and peak in the grandchild. And in the great-grandchild, which is the 4th generation, it's in its descendancy, but it's still quite strongly expressed. And then by the 5th and the 6th generations, it's on its descendant curve outwards, and by 7 it should be clear. Now what we know now is that if we can take that patient and we can really understand by assessing them correctly, talking to them, knowing the family story, and if the family story isn't available, because of the way we can work with the different technologies, we can unpick the story and make suppositions about the ancestral components that might be there. And we can then go into the hologram of the energetic matrix with that patient, and we can bring clarification. And what's really interesting is that patients start to have really interesting, quite profound experiences. And, dreams might reveal information. They'll get insights, and a degree of intuition about the issue will show up. And then they'll go back to their family and they might start to ask questions, and then the story emerges. And then, if we heal that individual, I truly believe that we're healing the timeline as well. So we're doing transgenerational healing. We're basically, from a quantum perspective, if it's true that you could say time is non-linear, and that the past, the present, and the future are all working simultaneously, if we fix that patient in that moment, then you could say, with the physics of how it works, we might be fixing grandma, who might even have She might even be dead by now. There's an energetic ripple that I think can go across the generations. And it's certainly true that if we deal with somebody who hasn't yet become a parent, and you can start to erase and reset these patterns of disturbance, that we can do some really good work in terms of preparation for conscious conception. So you might say, before I have a baby with my partner, I'm going to go in, I'm going to get this work done, and I'm going to make sure that we're in the best shape that we can be in. We can erase as much of the taint that comes from the family line as possible. We're going to make sure that our physical body is in the best shape. We're nourishing ourselves in the best way possible. We're strong, we're flexible, and that our biorhythms are working, and that the cyclical patterns that work in the body are working optimally, and that the meridian pathways are clear and unimpeded, so that the information from the light body can travel where it needs to get to without obstruction, and that the chakra system is clear and open and flowing properly, not holding on to previous trauma, because the trauma often goes into the chakra system as a first entry point. Those are wheels of light, and that's where we hold a lot of trauma. And then beyond that, the energy field needs to be kept clear of static. And it's actually, once you understand it, a very, very simple proposition. But we have the physical aspects to think about, and then we have the very, very subtle bioenergetic aspects that link very much into consciousness, and how we're operating at that level from a more spiritual perspective, in a very non-religious sense. We're talking about a spiritual perspective that is really linking to the higher self of that individual.
Yeah, there's so much I could say about all this. This is fascinating. What I'm taking from it is things that happen, like whatever mental health issues we might be struggling with, might not be our fault, but we can take responsibility, and it certainly is our responsibility to take radical responsibility for our health and do something about it. And we can do something about it. And what you said now about, if you haven't, I'm sat here feeding my third child, speaking to you, and anything to keep them quiet. And certainly I wasn't aware of any of this when I had my first child. But what is good to know is that we don't have to sit and just kind of allow things to happen to us. We can take control and change how we go forward with our families, which I think is empowering.
Well, patterns repeat, Mari.
Yeah.
We have often, if we look at the family story and we look at the generational outworking of that story, I'm very firmly convinced that what we tend to do now is we tend to fall into patterns where we repeat. There's almost like a screenplay for the family and the family story, and we can be very easily, it might not look like it, but we're very easily playing out the screenplay for that particular archetypal group, let's say, all right? And what I observe is that some people will come in with their challenges. It could be health challenges, it could be more, existential, spiritual challenges. And they say to me, it stops with me. I saw my grandparents do this. I saw my parents do this, and it stops with me. The abuse stops with me. This is not going to be my children's experience. So then you can say, do we incarnate into a family line consciously? Do we choose the parents so that we can have the experience to do the soul growth? Is the Earth School something that we choose? Did I choose my childhood with these people as my parents? What gifts did they bring me? And what taint is there? And do I accept my role? And am I here to clarify the pattern? That, where, to a certain extent, do I take on the role of clearing this pattern for the benefit of the family, the ancestors, and the progeny that is yet to come? is there a role for me at that level? And that's what I find so interesting, because I genuinely believe now that if we're conscious and awake and we can look and dissect our life story, quite often we can say yes to the trauma that we suffered. We can say, well, you know, I thank God for the fact that that happened. And at a certain level, I chose it so I could work with it to clear it, not just for my benefit, for the benefit of my ancestors who knew no better, and for the children that I'm going to have who won't have to have this experience.
Yeah, I've
And
heard that from so many people.
You know, it's a really beautiful construct, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, but it takes it's hard to see that, I guess, when you're in the middle of something. But I've heard from so many people who've gone through different traumas, and they've all said, actually, now I'm on the other side. I'm actually grateful for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
I would say that there's once the time has passed and the work has been done, and there's the gratitude for the difficulty, I'd say it's almost universal, where people, unless they're still in a victim consciousness, you know, and in which case, you know, we have to support people who haven't yet seen that there's a lesson in their suffering. It gets into a very, very interesting debate, because, you know, those of us that come into the Western world in good families, well resourced, with plenty of food, and you could say a comfortable life, probably very easy, and you could say a little bit indulgent to sit here and say, thank God for my trauma, you know, whereas you might look at someone in the middle of a Somalian war with no food and think, well, my God, actually, is that a choice?
Yeah.
Does that human being choose that living experience? Because that's real. I mean, look at what's going on in the world in all sorts of different areas. You know, is that, you know, is that choice? Is that, you could say, the will of the spirit? I'm not sure, but, you know, I've spoken to many people that have come out of very, very extreme situations. I remember the situation in Kosovo, and I remember treating a guy that had been in the middle of all of that, and he'd had acute trauma, and I mean, you know, it was awful what he went through, but he was in the end able to say that there had been growth in there, and there had been he could never take the trauma away, but there had been, as a human being, he was now, you know, much stronger for it, for having come through it.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess from trauma can come triumph, right? So yeah. Thank you for that. That's I really like hearing about things that I know very little about, that kind of expand my awareness of what it means to be human. So thank you.
But we talked about mental health. You know, if you look at anxiety and you look at the pathways for anxiety, everybody wants to feel safe. And if safety is ever questioned, however old you are, typically if you're very young and safety is questioned, there's an imprint of feeling insecure, it can trigger the whole vagal pathway, it can trigger the HPA axis, and then that can lead to anxiety. There's a very fine line between anxiety and depression. We've also got the brain health to think about, because if the cranial system is very tight, the blood flow to the brain and the venous blood away from the brain and the lymph, if the brain is toxic, if there's neurotoxicity, then we can be subject to those problems. So there are lots of elements to this. There are lots of things that we can do with better nutrition, switching off inflammation, getting the cranium released, not just clearing the energy. So as I said at the very beginning, you know, it's a multifactorial kind of process. It's like a bicycle wheel. You know, there are many spokes to the wheel, and they all have to be in equal tension for the thing to clarify fully. But transgenerational inheritance, and you could say the idea of cell memory in the individual, but also cell memory from the standpoint of the group that we incarnate into, the tribe, if we could call it that. You know, we're learning to understand the individual nature. There is also the tribal nature. So the lower end of the chakra system links into that, our family of origin and our tribe. And the higher we go through the chakra system, the more we get into the idea of the self and the individual, and then you could say the higher self. So this is all stuff that we love to teach. You know, this weekend we're going to have a really nice class. We're going to consider a lot of these ideas and, you know, what to do to fix it. So I hope that one day when, you know, you've got a little bit of free time, once the baby is a bit bigger, and, you know, that you'll come and we'll teach you more about all of this, you know, because it is so interesting. It really is. I hope that helps to answer.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I think we should go into more detail about this. I need to just do a bit more reading so I can spar a bit better with you. Thank you so much, Jeff.
All right, Laurie, it's been fun.
And that is the end of this episode. I hope that you've taken the wisdom and knowledge and the clarity from it that was my intention to pass on to you. If there's anything you would like to know more about, please reach out to me or reach out to any of the participants in this podcast. You've been listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show with Mari Craig. I am passionate about helping mums get their energy back through simple nutritional changes, because we know that if mummy is happy, the family is happy. If you would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram under @smallstepstowellness, or visit my website smallstepstowellness.info. Speak to you soon.